Hi, everyone. Welcome back to See the Invisible, Living with an Invisible or Rare Disease. My name is Rhonda Franny Jefferson, and thank you so much for taking the time out to listen today. If this is your first time to this podcast, welcome. I hope that you can get some information that you can use, as well as some encouragement in knowing that you are not alone. Before I get started with the podcast, as usual, I just want to say that I am in no way a medical, insurance, or legal expert. If you do have any questions regarding any one of those areas, please be sure to reach out to someone who's in an appropriate field. So, I had done some episodes in the past about how technology impacts those with illnesses or disabilities. So these past 50 some days has been a test for me in that area. It wasn't anything major, just a few times, but it gradually started to build up. So our internet and cable, they're both from the same company. So if I happen to go back and say internet one time and cable the next time, it's all the same company. But they sent out a new modem, still started or still continued to happen. So I called and they sent out a technician, and he went out to the pole to check, and part of the wire had actually melted. So he fixed that area of the wire. So it worked for about a day, then started again. A second tech comes out, he finds another melted area, he fixes that, works for a while, then starts happening again. The third tech was the same as the first, so he just didn't even, you know, bother to fix anything. He said we have to have the whole line replaced. It was above ground, and now they are looking at burying most lines. So that was going to be a while, and trust me, it's been a while. And so at some points we were talking about the internet going out 30 times a day or more, sometimes for a minute or two, other times for longer periods of time. And really, a lot of the inconvenience was it would take so long to come back up and get everything back online. By the time we started something, it would go out again. So, um, also at one time, when they come out, the last time actually, it was with the manager or a district supervisor. And so they explained the line needs to be replaced anyway. It was an older type of line that they don't even use anymore. But the electricity was arcing, so I needed to get electric department to come out. That is through our city. So the first guy comes out and says nothing's wrong, but a second guy shows up. And, at this point, I'm kind of questioning things. And the second guy continues to test, and he's like, oh, yeah, things are uneven. They're not balanced, and they actually needed to replace the transformer. They had been out to the general area sometime previously and had looked at the transformer. So he's like, okay, it needs to be replaced. So, I'm not really good with electronics as far as like the actual wiring aspects. And so they were out there fixing it. There were about 6 or 7 people out there. And, well, it wasn't really over. But anyway, they keep blaming each other. The electric department says the cable company always blames the electric department. The electric again. Thankfully, we know someone who's an electrician, and my dryer stopped working, and it said it was because of a power failure. About the technology and how we've become reliant on it to an extent. And, you know, I use Alexa really for a lot of different things. By the way, That is not like an endorsement or anything of one um, type of smart home device or another. It's just what I happen to use. And, I've kind of gotten used to it. It does help, um, as far as me being able to do certain things. And it's a really big convenience. Plus, I do sometimes fall. Thankfully, it's been a while, but it's good to have that resource. It's like an intercom between rooms. And that way, if I need help, someone in my family can come help me. So, it was very frustrating on that aspect that if I fell or if I needed emergency assistance through um, my home security, which does run through the internet, then, it could be an even bigger issue. So I've also been pretty shaky since the second dose of the COVID vaccine. And I mean, it's totally worth it for me to get the vaccine. But the second dose was really, really a lot different than the first dose. So, um, you know, I, I felt dizzy more than once. So not having that backup of, the smart home features, the intercom, it was a little unnerving, after I've gotten used to having it in case there's an issue. So, on the plus side, I've learned how to improvise, such as for a good portion of the time while I was working on this, I was actually using the hotspot on my cell phone so that I could work while the electric was out. Um, so, again, I just kind of found it funny and for letting me my illness and, something, that probably 20 years ago you wouldn't even think of impacting those accommodations now is a major part of it. Because 20 years ago, we probably would have never thought about, whether it's Alexa or Google or any of those, um, we wouldn't think about those devices. Now, I do just have a couple pieces of exciting news before I go into the topic of this podcast, which is autoimmune versus autoinflammatory. First is we are approaching 500 downloads or listens, so that's pretty exciting. And then one piece of news that was a complete surprise is there's an organization called All Stripes, and the founder of that company has a rare disease, and the company really tries to push forward research on rare and genetic illnesses. And they're actually in both the UK and the US, and they actually included mine on there, which was a really big surprise. It made me feel too that hopefully some, again, some information that, someone maybe didn't have before, or just feeling of not being alone while having a rare illness, that, if it's just one person gets any benefit from, listening to someone who has a similar illness or has another rare disease, that's really what I want is, people to have a voice, to not feel alone, and understand that there are others out there, with similar illnesses, and to feel some hope and support. So I'll include the link to that in the description. But again, that was just like a really big surprise. I was tagged on a Twitter um, tweet, and at the time, I actually was getting my second dose of the vaccine. Then I had to go immediately to my primary care physician for a different appointment. And then when I get home, I didn't have any internet, of course, at the time. So by the time I check everything, it's pretty late, and I realize what the tweet actually said, and I was just kind of in awe, and like I said, really exciting. So, if you get a chance to read about that blog, as well as just a little bit about All Stripes, I know that I went on 23andMe to provide information about my specific illness. I know 23andMe, again, not like a paid promotion or anything. You can do surveys, and they're trying to get a good cross section of what type of illnesses some people may have, whether it's genetic, and they're really trying to advance some research as well. So um, for a very long time, I used the terms interchangeably until a specialist that I was seeing told me that no, these are actually different types of illnesses. And as always, my resources or sources that I used will be included in the description. At times, I may be using either direct quotes or using a direct quote with some information that I'm adding in between them. One of the reasons why is a lot of the information is very technical. So I may, read directly from one item, but then add, some information that I've either gleaned from speaking with, a doctor, another healthcare professional, or just in my other experiences. So, looking at autoimmune, and autoimmune are much more common, if you can actually say common, than autoinflammatory. I think that those are both individually pretty rare. But as far as the whole category of autoimmune, there does tend to be more people who have the autoimmune diseases. There were actually two very, very different numbers when I looked at stats about how many people have autoimmune diseases. The National Institute of Health said approximately 23.5 million, but another organization said 50 million. Now, of a family or grouping of illnesses. So, there's more than 24, I'm sure. It's hard sometimes to find exhaustive lists, though. I even know with mine, which is an autoinflammatory, you, to find my illness listed on anything is, pretty uncommon, but I actually did find it listed on something during the research for this week's episode. So that was, pretty exciting as well. So I would probably lean closer to the 50 million for the autoimmune illnesses. Now, I could not actually find numbers for an autoinflammatory diseases, like how many people have this type of illness. And to me, that's a little scary because it shouldn't be that hard to find that information. I'm not looking for exact numbers with a breakdown of, how many in each state or anything like that, just an estimate, but I couldn't even find that. But I did find that the distinction between the two types is still pretty new, so it may take some time for the information to catch up. I was actually reviewing one article, and I believe it was from about 7 years ago. And the doctor who had written the article said that when he was discussing this during a convention, there were some doctors who weren't even aware of autoinflammatory illnesses. So, that was only 7 years ago. And hopefully, things have come a long way since then. But, still, that just shows how new it actually is. So, what is an autoinflammatory disease? an autoimmune disease, and what are the differences between the two, and what are the similarities. So, to start with a similarity, they are both caused basically because of an issue with the immune system, but there are lots of differences, and that's why the treatment for the two different types can vary. However, even though some of the articles that I read said that the treatments can vary for the two different types, meaning that autoinflammatory may be treated differently than autoimmune, I could not actually find any of the differences in how they are treated for each illness type, so autoimmune or autoinflammatory. I found that every article I read showed the same types of medications were used to treat them. So it was kind of contradictory. I did reach out to one of my specialists to see if she could provide any insight, but so far I haven't heard back, and she may be able to just because being it did. So to start with autoinflammatory, these illnesses are caused by some type of problem or dysfunction of what's called the innate immune system. Now, um, I'm thinking of that innate immune system kind of like a primitive or very instinctual immune system. So it is defined, or the innate immune system is the body's first line of defense against pathogens such as bacteria and viruses. So, whenever there's any type of foreign substance, um, this part of the immune system uses white cells and inflammation to try to fight those. So, basically, when you have an autoinflammatory disease, the white cells and inflammation are more active. So, you know, even though your body isn't fighting anything at the moment, such as it's not fighting a flu or an infection, you will still have inflammation throughout your body. It sees most anything as something to fight. Someone once described it to me as, um, say if you've ever gotten a splinter in your finger and maybe didn't get the whole splinter out, at some point your body's natural response is to form some type of capsule around it almost. So that's instinctual in the way your body fights something. Thinking of it on a more day to day level, think of it if you're walking and you start to fall and you put your arms out to try to catch you. That's kind of instinctual. So that is your first line of defense. So some examples of autoinflammatory conditions are Behçet's and Still's, which is mine. So this is where it was listed, and periodic fever syndromes. Now, again, I have the Still's disease, and it's rarely listed anywhere, and I've even had doctors and physician's assistants tell me that they need to look it up, during the middle of a treatment. This is usually if I've gone to an ER or immediate care, and sometimes Still's is not even on a list of rare diseases. So, to explain a little bit about periodic fever syndromes, I can, sometimes be running a fever for no reason. Technically not sick. I don't have an infection. I don't have a virus, and I'm still running a fever. And it's called a spiking fever. So I might wake up fine. 3 hours later, I get a fever. Then it drops. Then it comes back 4 hours after that. Then it drops. Then it goes back up. And it's just a very back and forth thing. Now, depending on if I'm in a flare up or not, it may or may not be happening more frequently. Now, I just know in reading things on some of my support groups that, one person mentioned that her doctor actually wrote her a note because of COVID, wherever you go, they do take your temperature to explain that, she may have a recurring fever, but not necessarily related to COVID. Um, Another issue with this type of illness is it can mimic other illnesses. It can affect everybody differently, but one of the main issues I have is a sore throat. And, before my diagnosis, I would start to get a sore throat, then painful cough. My joints would get achy. And I am allergic to some earlier generations of the flu vaccine, even though my immunologist just cleared me for having the flu shot in the future. But if I start to get ill, I don't ever know really what it is for sure. I've started to develop almost like instinctual ways to, figure out, is it stills? Is it a respiratory infection? Is it something else? But I found that I am in no way 100% correct when it comes to this. And a lot of times before my diagnosis, I would be diagnosed with an upper respiratory infection. And, I don't always get a fever with a flare up. So there might be times I'm thinking it's allergies, but it's actually a flare up. And one time I started to have, fever, aches, chills, all of those things. And I thought I was getting a flare up. And this was relatively early on in my diagnosis, but my doctor and I still had this kind of protocol that I would work with taking some prednisone or increasing the dosage. And it was a Friday afternoon. I figured I couldn't get in to see my doctor anyway, so I followed that, but it wasn't working. So I ended up going to the ER, and I actually had an infection in my leg. The doctors weren't familiar with my illness. I kind of had to go through all of that again, and I ended up in the hospital for a week on heavy-duty antibiotics. And this can I don't know. So, same thing with sinuses, and I'd be like, I just can't really tell you because, I have something that mimics or, almost imitates each other. It could be either stills, it could be sinuses, it could be allergies, it could be something completely different. So, again, it's really hard sometimes to tell the difference between, am I getting a flu, am I getting a virus, or is it a flare up? And now getting on to autoimmune. It's pretty much happening all the time. The, that part of the immune system starts looking at, invaders basically and starts to attack them, but it's attacking them on a more regular basis or at times when, it's not even needed. So some examples of autoimmune diseases are Sjogren's, type 1 diabetes, and lupus. So while I have less experiences really with these illnesses, I know, again, I used to family members who lived in Florida and I live in Delaware. So sometimes when they would come up to visit, they would say how cold they were. And, most of the people around here wouldn't think it was cold. But now that they've been back here for about 20 years or more, their bodies have adapted again. And, they might be cold when it actually is, like 20 degrees in the area. At least they're not cold when it's like under 65, which is how it used to be. And I'll include any talk about the current pandemic. But my first thought went back to when Europeans came over to the Americas. nobody really had an idea of germs and immune systems, things like that. But the Europeans had developed an immunity of certain diseases because, when they were born, they were around those illnesses, and their body started to develop an immune reaction to that. So, those illnesses didn't really impact them. Yet when they came to the Americas and met the indigenous peoples, they did not have any type of immunity to many of these illnesses. And that contact really brought about the eradication of many cultures and peoples. So even though no one really understood what was going on, in this case, it was an immune system that the Europeans had adapted. So with an autoimmune illness, the body does build up antibodies to certain illnesses. I'm sorry, with an autoimmune, the body does build up antibodies and attacks, but instead of it just being with certain illnesses, it's pretty much, acting like that on a more regular or increasing basis. Now, some of the diseases have both aspects of autoimmune and autoinflammatory. Crohn's disease could be an example of that. For one thing, a lot of the autoimmune diseases do have an inflammatory aspect to it. So, inflammation around the joints and things like that, inflammation around, the GI tract. And, so it's sometimes hard with certain illnesses to say it's one or the other because they will include symptoms of both. So, just kind of my thoughts on things that I read about while reviewing the differences. One is from the beginning of my diagnosis, I was told that there is no genetic factor in autoinflammatory diseases. Yet the terms such as hereditary, genetic, familial, they were all kind of spread out through different articles. So, either the doctor who first told me that wasn't familiar with the fact that there could be a genetic aspect to it, or there's been a further understanding of the autoinflammatory diseases since then. So a little scary there, where it may seem like there was some misinformation, but the genetic aspect or familial aspect may not be the same for everyone. There's also what's called spontaneous, and that's where a gene mutates on its own to create the autoinflammatory disease, where most may be able to be traced. Going back on my memory about biology, there are the dominant and recessive, and usually the dominant genes win out, but that's usually not always. So if both parents have some type of recessive gene and they have a child, there is a chance that that recessive gene may bring about an autoimmune or autoinflammatory disease. One of the reasons I had asked to at the time was my sister had an autoinflammatory illness. So that actually, in a lot of ways, sped my diagnosis up some. Um, and of course, I mentioned it to the doctors, but it took a little while to figure out. But that was really a turning point as far as what the doctors were looking for. So, just all of this highlights to me how both illnesses are not completely understood and that lots of work still needs to be done. So, I will just continue to look for, surveys and questionnaires on 23andMe, and, hope that one day it helps, um, for the treatment or better diagnosis, quicker diagnosis of these illnesses than is happening now. Now, as far as treatments, there are a few different types of treatments used. And this is going to be a direct quote, and hopefully I am pronouncing everything correctly. Because autoinflammatory diseases are typically associated with excess production of cytokines, they are sometimes treated with so-called biologics, antibodies that mop up these excess cytokines. However, biologics are expensive and can have significant side effects. So to say they're expensive is kind of an understatement. We are talking thousands and thousands of dollars per treatment. A lot of the manufacturers of these medications have some type of assistance program. Kind of on a side note of that, if they have an assistance program where it's being covered for most people, my thought is, why not? Just kind of make it affordable to begin with, but, that's the way it is for now. And as far as the side effects, the biggest one that I found is it does affect the immune system. In order for it to work properly, it actually depresses or suppresses the immune system. So that's not good as far as, fighting other types of illnesses or infections. But also some of the other treatments, such as steroids or DMARDs, which I will get into in a few minutes, they do them also. So pretty much the only way to stop the overactive autoimmune responses and the autoinflammatory responses is you need to be treated with something that decreases the immune system. So it's definitely not a win-win situation. So, usually you will have to be very diligent, very careful about things. When I was hospitalized and, when I mentioned earlier about how quickly it came on, I think part of it was the fact of me being on a DMARD and a steroid, and I pretty much had no immune system. So it just came on very, very quickly. And as soon as I mentioned to the doctors about the medications I was on, they understood very quickly that, my immune system was suppressed. And another thing with the medications is it's kind of trial and error. Sometimes my steroid amount or prescription needed to be adjusted. What works for one person may not work with another. And also sometimes long-term usage of some of the medications can have other impacts to, say, the liver. I know with me, just because of the disease being rare and up until last year not having the FDA-approved treatment, it really was a lot of trial and error in finding out what worked for me. But I was on a steroid for an extremely, extremely long time, and it's kind of thrown off my sleep patterns. And a specialist I saw at a hospital, it's about 2 hours from here, he told me that probably my sleep cycle would never be the same again. Now, kind of going back to a previous podcast, autoimmune diseases, like I mentioned previously, there were different numbers between 23 million or 50 million. And so when you look at those numbers, you might not be thinking, well, that's not really a rare illness. Well, in some ways it is, because autoimmune illnesses is kind of an umbrella term, but there are a number of different illnesses within that. So getting the proper diagnosis is important too, because you want to make sure, and when I say you, I mean the healthcare professionals that you're seeing along with yourself, you need to make the decisions based on the correct diagnosis. But to give you a comparison, all of the autoimmune diseases together, whether we're looking at the 23 million or 50 million number, I wanted to compare that to something that, was not autoimmune. And I wanted to look at type 2 diabetes. Now, type 1 is considered an autoimmune response. So when I looked look at type 2, there's approximately 34 million Americans with one of the types of diabetes, but between 90 and 95% are type 2. So just to use, a figure kind of somewhere, in the middle there, let's just say 28 million have type 2 diabetes. So that is one illness in itself. And if we're looking at the lower number of people with autoimmune illnesses, there are more people, who have type 2 diabetes than who may have one of the 24 autoimmune illnesses that the NIH was looking at. So just to kind of remind from earlier in this episode that the 23 million number was based on 24 autoimmune diseases. Where there may be more than 24, it was just based on those figures. Now, the common treatments are biologics, which I mentioned, and they're the downfalls of the pricing as well as the immune system. Now, the next is kind of an over-the-counter or more common treatment. It's non-steroidal anti-inflammatory drugs, or NSAIDs. Basically, they reduce inflammation. So the most common NSAIDs that we see are ibuprofen or naproxen. So in some name brand terms, you have like Advil or Motrin or Midol, and for naproxen, it's usually Aleve that you might see. And these are used mainly for more everyday ailments. I know it works best for me when I start to get a headache. Tylenol doesn't really work, but an NSAID will. Now, the next is, and I'm really going to try to say this, glucocorticoids. And those also reduce inflammation. And there's a long list of different types, but really these are steroids. And, so the most common forms are cortisone, methylprednisone, and prednisone. So some of these medications can actually increase your blood sugar. And so that's something that needs to be monitored in terms of diabetes. You have to also keep an eye on other minerals such as calcium. It can also cause an increase to your cholesterol. So yeah, a whole bunch of lovely side effects. Now, just kind of an aside, I remember when I was first diagnosed and I came home from the hospital, I was either on 60 or 80 milligrams of prednisone at the time. I know I had been on 80 grams at one point, or milligrams, I'm sorry, at one point, and, we kind of dropped it down. But initially when I came home, I was still exhausted, tired, and, there were really no side effects that I saw from the prednisone. But after a few weeks from being home and I was feeling a little bit better, I couldn't sleep. I felt like I needed to be pacing the house, but at the same time, it hurt to pace. So, come to find out, I went online because during this whole time, my doctors were telling me there's some pretty bad side effects. But at the time, it was kind of necessary. So I had to take them. And so finally, I sat down and said, okay, let me see what the side effects are. And it did give some of those side effects, such as, insomnia. And then it said that it could be increased in those who are taking more than 10 milligrams per day. And my thought was, oh, yep, I guess this explains the insomnia. So whether it was at 60 or 80, I was definitely on the high end. But at the same time, too, they can suppress your immune system, too. Now, earlier I also mentioned DMARDs. These are disease-modifying anti-rheumatic drugs, and they're used to help decrease the damage in the tissue and the joints and organs that come about as a result of the inflammation. And so DMARDs do help block the inflammation, and I know that is a big concern for a lot of people with autoinflammatory diseases, and I know that's a big concern for me. Now, each DMARD, I can't say they all have specific, benefits or anything from one compared to the other. They all have different aspects as far as benefits and, kind of the pros and the cons. But, it is very commonly prescribed for rheumatoid arthritis, and methotrexate seems to be the one that's most commonly prescribed. And I did read through some of the risks, and it said that common symptoms or side effects are nausea, swollen gums, mouth sores, and tiredness. And it can cause an increase in liver enzymes. Now, as far as most of those, I actually get that with my illness anyway. Nausea, swollen gums, and mouth sores, tiredness, all of that comes with my illness no matter what. So if the methotrexate is keeping down the inflammation to help preserve my joints and, organ function, I'm okay with that because I would, have those other symptoms or side effects anyway. And these types of medications can be used in conjunction with others. So there are a few different types of what's called therapy. With the DMARDs, it can be used in conjunction with, a steroid, with a biologic, with both, with other types of anti-inflammatories. For me, it's usually a biologic and a DMARD, but if I'm in a flare-up, then a steroid will be added. So this was really most of the information that I found kind of summarized and put in more of an everyday terminology as far as the differences between autoimmune and autoinflammatory and how the medications that are used to treat them actually work. So, the biggest issue that I find no matter what in any of those medication is the decreased immune system. So it's very, very important to stay vigilant because of another medical, I guess you'd say, condition that I have. I'm more prone to certain infections. So after that experience very early on where I was hospitalized that quickly, I actually, make sure I check often to see if I have any breaks of skin, anything that might potentially cause an infection, because I do not want to get back to that point again. It was very scary while I was in the hospital, and, I just want to be as precautious as ever. Just like now too, I've had the vaccines for COVID. I'm still going to continue to be cautious, and wear my mask, things like that, social distancing. But it's very important to, know what the side effects are of your medication, to be aware of things, such as a decrease in immune system if you do happen to have an autoinflammatory or autoimmune. Even, if you're listening and you don't have one of those two types of illnesses, it's still really important to understand what the side effects are of your medications so you can help determine, are you becoming ill, or could it just be a side effect of a medication? And understanding those will help you understand when you should reach out to your doctor. So again, I'm not a medical professional myself, but, if you're looking at everything and you have a question, definitely reach out to, one of your specialists or your primary care physician so that, they can assist you further. But having an understanding of how those medications work will help you understand your body better and your reactions. Well, that is about all I have for today's episode. I'm very excited to get it done, even though it's almost 11 o'clock Eastern time. But I, again, finally have a steady internet connection. I did have to take a short nap earlier because of, the side effect of the vaccine. Again, very, very worth it. but it's also nice because I'm actually getting some like nice solid sleep. I may wake up a little tired, but it's sometimes hard for me to sleep. So I am getting, some good heavy sleep, and that's a really nice side effect to that extent. Not some of the others, but that is really nice. But I hope that everybody was able to get a little bit of information from this episode, even if it was just understanding the different terminologies that are used. Again, I will leave all of the source material linked in the description of the podcast. And if you want to take a look at allstripes.com or their blog, I'll leave that in there as well. And, again, I will also have my contact information in the description. So if you ever feel like, reaching out or suggesting a topic, please do so. I want to make sure I'm including a number of different types of illnesses, because when I say rare or invisible, it really encompasses so many different illnesses that, I want to bring awareness as much as I can to as many as we can, because, just bringing those to the forefront or bringing attention to any of the rare illnesses may help get a jump start on any type of treatment research, and other types of research that can be done into those illnesses. Right. Well, thank you everybody for joining me today, and I do hope everybody has a great rest of your week, and I will talk to you next week. Bye-bye.